Hi everyone, this is Matt. Welcome back to Touchgrass Gardening. Today we're going to talk about the rare decorative trees in my yard, and there's 6 of them, so let's get going. Now the tree that you see next to me is a Royal Poinciana, and this is what I consider to be the most beautiful tree there is, especially in terms of the foliage and the red flamboyant flowers that you see. This tree is also known as the flamboyant tree because of what its flowers look like when it's in bloom. And if you come in here, you can see this foliage is just this lush tropical look that you don't get to see on pretty much any tree that's in my area. And that's why I just loved planting this at the front of my yard. It's the first thing you see when you come to my house is this Royal Poinciana. And it is the beginning of May, so it has all this new foliage on it. About 3 weeks ago, it was just a stick. And so it's deciduous where I live in Zone 9B. And it loses its leaves every year, but it comes back at the end of April and then will stay lush until about the first week of January when there's an initial freeze, and then it'll drop all its leaves. And so that is one thing you want to think about, is that this tree is going to be bare for about 4 months. And you need to protect it during those winter months because it doesn't like being in non-tropical climates. It wants to be in a place where it can always have its leaves, but it's such a hardy tree that it can take freezes and still come back the next year. So what I do in terms of care is I'll put a wrap around the trunk. And so I wrap it to about 6-8 feet tall. So it has that freeze protection around the trunk, which is what I really want to ensure survives the winter. And then on the coldest nights, like we get down to about 25 Fahrenheit, I'll put a tiny heater here. And I'll also put these C9 Christmas lights all up the trunk. So it kind of looks like a Christmas decoration, but I'm actually doing it for the warmth of the lights that I wrap around that frost fabric. So I do some work on this tree in the winter to ensure that it survives. And that's why you don't see a lot of them around where I live, because it's just a little bit more work than people are accustomed to. So for me, I think it's worth it because this tree is just so beautiful. It's a tree that I don't often see. And it's a tree that has done well for us. It's been in the ground for 2 years now, and it just looks wonderful. And because I was able to keep it in the ground and have it do well, I've decided I also want to plant another one. This is the red version. This is the more common version of Royal Poinciana. But there's also a variant which is yellow. And so I've put those on both sides of my driveway, where I have the red one here. And then this is one that we just put in, this yellow Royal Poinciana. And so this was about half the size when I bought it last winter from a seller on Etsy. And I kept it inside under a grow light. And you can see in one of my previous videos about how to create a greenhouse in your bathroom. And you can see how big it's gotten now already. I put it in the ground, it's doing well. It's been in the ground for about a month and it already has new growth on it. So Royal Poinciana, like you can see, it's out in the open. There's no protection, there's no microclimate. I have rocks all the way up to the trunk. It doesn't care. This is a super hardy tree, one of the hardiest trees that are in my yard for tropicals. You just have to think about the winter and protecting it from cold. But in the summer, from the sun, from the wind, it is very hardy. It doesn't care. So just think about the winter, and then you can have a tree like this in your yard. So the tree next to me is a rainbow shower tree, or also called a rainbow cassia. And the cassia that most people know of is a yellow cassia. It's relatively common in tropical climates, but this is a variation that has rainbow colored flowers. Now this tree is a little bit still too small to show blooms. It's been in the ground for 1.5 years, and it's struggled a little bit in my climate because it's a little bit too cold for it. It really wants to be in a tropical zone 10 plus climate, but here in zone 9B, I've been able to have it survive, and this past winter, it's kept all its leaves. So I'm hopeful for this summer that it's really going to come back and start growing a lot. But as you can see, most of the foliage is pretty low because I do cover it. And then in the winter, you know, this up here gets less coverage and I get dieback. And so for this type of tropical tree where it's not as hardy as a Royal Poinciana that we just talked about, you do get a little bit more dieback. And until the trunk gets thicker and that I can really wrap it with frost fabric, this tree is going to struggle and kind of stay low in a bushy sense. I want to eventually move it up to be more like a tree and then treat it like the Royal Poinciana. But for the time being, I've kind of had to treat it like a bush where I just cover it and put a tiny heater under it. And that's really, I think, stunted the growth. But because it's alive, there's still hope. And it's been in the ground for over a year with a summer and a winter. That's kind of my barometer for how I think I can make a tree survive and thrive in our area, because we have both harsh summers and harsh winters. And so you can see there's a lot of new growth on this tree already. And it just has some of the most interesting foliage that I've ever seen and ever felt. It feels like velvet. It has the strangest leaf feeling to it. And my daughter will just come out here and just sort of play with the leaves all the time, just because it feels like you're kind of feeling like velvet fabric. And so this is one of those trees that I really want to make grow in my yard, and I'm really babying to try to make sure that it lives. It's in morning sun, afternoon shade. It has this oak next to it from my neighbor's yard, and then it's kind of in this area where it gets sun until about noon. And I do think it's pretty sun tolerant, so it could probably take a little bit more sun. But again, the issue with this tree is going to be the cold. So if you're thinking about planting a cassia, especially a rainbow cassia, which is slightly more sensitive, you really want to think about how you're going to protect it in the winter and ensure that you can get it years of growth and strength before you can kind of release it into the wild and let it get to that stage where it can bloom and be as beautiful as you see in those pictures. So this is a silk floss tree, and this is the pink variety of silk floss, which is the more common variety of what you'll see if you go to your local nursery and look for a silk floss tree. And when you do first look for a silk floss tree, you're going to see that there are spikes on the trunk, which is what really distinguishes this tree from a lot of others, because I don't know of many other trees that have spikes quite like this. And not every silk floss tree has this many spikes. So when you do pick one out, if you can see signs of more spikes versus just a smooth trunk, that's how you know, once it's in the ground for a few years, that it will start to develop more. And so when we went to a nursery, we picked the one that had the most spikes possible, because I just love the look. And there are ones, some silk floss are just almost completely smooth. So you really want to pick what you want for your yard. And I just really love the foliage of this tree too. It is deciduous, so it gets its leaves back, grows new every year, at least in my climate, where we do get a freeze. So after we get the first freeze, it drops all of its leaves. Prior to that freeze, it puts on a spectacular display of blooms. So this one is big pink blooms. The one I'll show after this is the other silk floss in my yard, which is white blooms. But if you're thinking about which tree to plant out of the 6 I'm showing today, this is the easiest in terms of maintenance that you could plant in your yard if you're more of a beginning gardener, because it can take almost all day full sun. I have this in an area now that gets full sun. It only will struggle a little bit in the hottest of climates. When we had 30 days straight of 110 degrees Fahrenheit, it did lose a couple branches on top, which I had to cut off, but after it cooled down a little bit, it all started regrowing again. So it is a hardy tree that if there is some dieback in summer or winter, it will regrow. And again, it's deciduous, so it's going to lose all of its leaves. And in the winter, in the first year, I wrapped it, and then when we got to our coldest 25 degree Fahrenheit days, I put a small heater, but only in the first year. This has been in the ground 2.5 years now. In the second year, I didn't winter protect this at all. So we got down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit again, no protection, came back, and it looks like this. So this is a really hardy, unique tropical tree that you can plant in a zone like mine, which gets really hot summers and freezing winters. And you just get this unique look that you don't see on other properties. And that's why I call it one of my rare ornamental trees, because it's just so striking and you're really not gonna see it in many other places. So think about planting this tree, especially if you're thinking about where should I start and what should I plant first. So this is my white silk floss, and you can see it's significantly smaller than the pink silk floss that I just showed you. So this was just put in the ground a few months ago. This was also in my winter greenhouse, and it's grown quite a bit since the last time I showed this. And you can see that it's in a spot that's gonna get pretty much full all-day sun. And so I'm gonna be watching it in the next few months to see if there's any leaf burn, and then I'll put up a shade cloth next to it to ensure that it can make it through its first summer. Because with silk floss, it can take our full sun, but in the first summer, especially when it's really small, you might want to think about trying to protect it that first summer. And in the winter, because it's small, again, I'm going to protect it a little bit more to get it through that first winter. But after the first winter, these trees are pretty hardy. So they're deciduous, they lose all their leaves, but then they come back every spring, and then you're going to see those big, beautiful blooms in the fall, right before it loses its leaves. So it's normally the type of tree that it loses all its leaves, and then it just has flowers. So it's just a spectacular display. In particular, this one is white, the other one is pink. I think they're both just some of the most beautiful trees that you can find. And the other thing I'll notice is there's no spikes on this one yet. So the other one is full of spikes. And silk floss doesn't really get its spikes until it gets bigger. And you don't really know how spiky your tree is gonna be until it's bigger. And that's one of the reasons that if I were to buy silk floss again, like I did with my pink one, I want to buy it a little bit bigger because I can tell how spiky the trunk is going to be, because I like the spikes. So I bought the spikiest one I could find. But when I have to mail order something like this white silk floss, it's pretty small. I couldn't find a bigger one at a local nursery. So I just have to take my chances. It might be totally smooth, no spikes at all. So we'll see what happens with this tree. But either way, like I've seen a white silk floss in the wild, and it's just an amazing tree. So I wanted one in my yard too. Next to me is my rainbow eucalyptus tree. And this is the tree that really got me excited about having my own big backyard when we were looking at houses and moving to Arizona. So I first watched a Seamus O'Leary video about which unique tropical trees that I could plant in my yard. And this is the one that really caught my attention because I didn't think it was possible to even grow a tree like this in Arizona. And after 2 years of having it in the ground, you certainly can. And it really is the tree that I fell in love with gardening with, along with my avocado. And I really baby this tree, and it's paid off for me. It's just a beautiful tree. It has this amazing artistic painting down the trunk that changes daily. As it flakes off, it changes color. And that's where it gets its name, the rainbow eucalyptus, is especially as it grows in years, this continues to look more and more rainbow. People say that it gets another color each year that it's in the ground. And again, this has been in the ground for 2 years. I got it, it was about 8 feet tall, and it's now about 30 feet tall. It's really the fastest growing tree in my yard. Like most eucalyptus, it's super fast growing. It's pretty hardy in some respects, so it can take sun, unlike any other tree that I've seen. It loves the sun. This gets full all day sun. It also sucks up water really fast, so the more water you can give it, the better. And it's super fast growing, so it's also a little bit lanky. And so in the wind, it'll really kind of go back and forth in a way that will scare you. And so that's why I have some of these support poles here and some of this breaking to try to give it some support on our windiest monsoon days, because I've been very afraid that this tree is going to fall over. And like a lot of eucalyptus do have a tendency to break in the wind. And so if you can kind of support it in its first few years until it gets a much bigger trunk, it's starting to get to that point where I can barely move it at all when I shake it. And I think that's the point where I can start to take these off. I'll probably take these off next year, leave them on one more year in our summer, and really ensure that it can make it through, because again, this is the tree that I probably baby the most. And the most attention that it needs is in the winter, because it doesn't like freezes. And because we get down to significantly below freezing in some days, usually 1 or 2 days in the winter, I come out here and I put a propane heater on it for those 2 or 3 days, or 2 or 3 nights actually, in the winter. And then I have plastic sheeting all around it and kind of create like a tent. And I can show that in one of my upcoming videos for winter protection, but sort of creating this area where it'll kind of keep the heat in and then make the heat go up. And that's worked for me, because I didn't really see any dieback this winter, even on our coldest days. And so I actually think this tree might be hardier than I gave it credit for in the beginning, because even on the top, even on the lateral branches that weren't getting that heat from my propane heater, it did not die back. So I think the main thing is to keep this trunk warm in the winter. And then in the summer, just give it water and sun and just let it grow, give it space. There are people that think, well, it's winter sensitive, I need to put it right next to a fence or right next to my house, give it that extra protection, but you don't realize how big this tree is gonna get. It's one of the biggest trees in the world. And so this tree gets over 100 feet tall, especially in its native climate. I think in Arizona, it'll get at least 50 feet tall, probably taller if you let it. So don't put it next to a structure. Don't put it next to your house, or else you're probably gonna regret it in 5 years' time, even though it'll be easier to keep alive during those first 5 years. So you really have to think about the balance of how you want your tree to look in the future. So this, again, is the rainbow eucalyptus. This is the tree that maybe I love the most other than my seedling avocados. And if you have a chance, if you want to get excited about gardening, if you want to spend time on gardening, put this tree in the ground and you too can have this beautiful color in your yard. So this has been the 6 rare decorative trees in my yard. I hope you enjoyed the video. In the comments below, let me know which tree you liked the most, which one you want to see a future video on when it's in bloom, and I'll do that for you. And then please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We're really growing and I'm enjoying doing these videos. I love reading the comments. So keep letting me know. Tell a friend if you haven't about our channel, and subscribe and join the community. Thanks so much.